Hello and welcome to my channel. So I'm going to be talking about fungus, and we need to keep rehashing all these details so we get a baseline where everyone's on the same page. And the thing about fungus is you need to know everything, or as much as we know about it, at the same time. Nothing really makes sense without context of these other parts of fungus. You need to understand all of it. So we're just going to be talking about, kind of broadly speaking, a lot of different things about fungus, and then when we have that established, we can go into further details. So you may have heard a lot about these things if you've done any research on mycology, or if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know kind of what I'm going to be talking about for this first part of the video, and then we're going to go into some, new material. And so what we need to do is start at the very beginning. We need to understand fungus and its role in the planet, and kind of on the biological nature macro side of things. So about 1 billion years ago, Earth was just a wasteland. It was pretty much a rocky wasteland, and it had water. And life was beginning to evolve in that water, whether it just came out of nowhere, maybe something came from space, who knows, whatever it is. Life was in water, and one of those types of organisms were these kinds of fungus. And these fungus eventually spread to land, and this is way before trees and before almost any other organism. They were kind of the first terrestrial organism to at least proliferate on land, to be successful. And what they ate and what they fed on, these really primordial funguses, were rocks and minerals and all this lava, stones, and this kind of volcanic landscape. And what they did was they would take their spores, essentially, and it would land on a rock, and then it would begin to grow its hyphae out and burrow and bore into the rock. And they were so powerful that they were able to split the rock into pieces, and they kept doing this thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And they began to create soil because they broke down rock so much, because they could feed off of the minerals with their enzymes. And then they started to create a situation in which other life could now take advantage of these resources that comes from all these kinds of minerals and rocks. It's because they were broken down enough for other organisms to be able to access them. And so already we have fungus terraforming the planet. They made it habitable for all kinds of organisms. And that's just one side of things. You also have to understand that through those millions of years, and still to this day, this is over 1 billion years long arms race. And it's between fungus and bacteria, essentially. And this is the driving force behind evolution, is that microscopic arms race between these different microorganisms. This is important for understanding why the world is the way it is, why there seems to be so much diversity and complexity. All of life, more or less, this is, generally speaking, the overarching position of nature is that life is a product, or complexity and evolution are products of an arms race between these microorganisms. And we understand this because a lot of the byproduct of fungus and bacteria, and even plants and animals, but we'll get into that in a little bit, they're the result of finding ways to access resources and then stop any other organism from obtaining that resource. Take the production of ethanol, for example. A fruit falls onto the forest floor, and then all these microorganisms attack that fruit. The way in which yeast ensures that they get basically the exclusive rights to that fruit. They keep it only to themselves. Is when they're breaking down the glucose, the sugar of the fruit with their enzymes, they release a chemical called ethanol, which is, we know it as alcohol. And alcohol is pretty much impossible for bacteria to live in. So by fermenting, and this is the process of fermentation, by fermenting a fruit, yeast is able to kill any other competitors to that fruit. And certain mammals like humans, bees and honey and stuff, bees and butterflies and stuff, are able to get drunk simply because we've developed a process that doesn't poison us. That ethanol doesn't poison us. It just affects our certain receptors because of a certain chemical that we have. But the creation of ethanol was the product of fungus and bacteria competing over something like fallen fruit. And again, we see this with penicillin, which is a major antibacterial. And this is, again, a product of a fungus creating a chemical solution to destroy its competitors. And this arms race between fungus and bacteria just escalates and escalates over millions of years. They find a niche, take advantage of it. The opposition finds ways to disrupt that, and then they have to go back and combat it, right? We all know what an arms race is. This is just a biological one, and one that occurs on a microscopic level. And it affects all of us because we have very real effects on the kind of development and evolution of some of these microorganisms are. And this is based off of the development of certain things like penicillin. We make enough penicillin, bacteria will eventually figure out how to defend against it. And then the fungus will need to develop a better form of penicillin to then kill the better bacteria. And it just escalates whether we are moving it along or using these chemicals or not. But this is going on for 1 billion years before we ever existed, and will likely go on after we exist. This is that competing nature of the different organisms, and most everything happens on the microscopic level. I've talked about evolution before and how it's driven by intelligent microorganisms, and also the conscious choices of the larger organisms. But it's all done with this conscious, sentient choice, mainly of the microorganisms, the microscopic level. That's where things change. That's where things happen. And so I won't get into that too much. So now let's talk a little bit about the structure of fungus. They are mostly microscopic, and they have kind of chitin cell walls. It's kind of in between plant and animal. They don't have as solid of a cell wall as plants, and they don't have as viscous of a membrane as animals, but they do have a very well protected armor around them, and most of them are spores, but many are spores that grow into hyphae. Hyphae are like long strings, and these strings branch out into what's called the mycelium. And the mycelium is what we mostly see on forest floors and in the earth, in the ground. And these mycelium burrow into the ground and eat nutrients and decompose things from a place we never even notice, right? It's underground, they're tiny strings. Most of them we won't ever even see. In order to reproduce, these mycelium grow mushrooms. A mushroom is the reproductive fruiting body of a mycelium. And these fungal structures, these mushrooms, will go on to release millions of spores. And what's interesting is that fungus, they have many genders, and all of these genders are compatible with each other. Some can have thousands or tens of thousands of different genders, and they're different genders, and they're compatible with each other. It's pretty It's pretty crazy. It's hard to wrap your head around, but you look into this stuff and biology and stuff kind of breaks down, and we haven't even really gotten too much into it yet. But then there's other kinds of fungus like molds and yeasts and stuff. And yeasts are a part of a class called Ascomycotes, and these are just spores, and they make spore pods, and they float around and digest things with enzymes and continue to grow and proliferate like that. And that's the kind of yeast that ferments alcohol. It's kind of yeast that's in our bodies that we've kind of grown to be symbiotic with, and we'll get into that shortly. But then you have like mold growing fungus, which they grow little like these like microscopic little towers, and they have kind of these spore bulbs on them. I'm not sure what the technical terms is. I'll have to refresh myself on that. But that's what mold is. That's that little fuzzy stuff you see when you leave bread out for too long. They release these little spores, and then they eat stuff and they grow into these reproductive parts, which is almost the only time you ever see a fungus is because you're seeing its reproductive structure, which is those fuzzy molds, which is mushrooms, and you don't really ever see the actual background process of the fungal organism living. There's also slime molds, and then you have lichen. And lichens are one of the most bizarre organisms on the planet because they're a combination of multiple organisms from different kingdoms of life. Mostly it is a fungus and a plant, and they've become basically one organism. The plant part of it develops sunlight into nutrients, and then the fungus part of it helps protect it and provide other nutrients. But it is one organism working together, but it's still not a single individual. And so it kind of puts into question a lot of different philosophical and biological debates about individuality and what it means to be. And lichen, they put a different perspective on that because they're completely different from anything we have on this planet. And at the same time, they're not different at all. Every organism, every multicellular organism has other organisms living on and in it, without which that main organism wouldn't survive. Take humans, for example. We have, I think, over 60% of our entire bodies are made out of organisms that are bacteria and fungus and things that aren't us. It puts into question who we are. We are not an individual, certainly not biologically speaking. And the more you learn about fungus, the more you see that they are their own intelligent, conscious organisms. And they're intelligent and conscious in different ways than we are. Even if we don't, well, let me put it this way. We don't even know how our neighbor thinks, or we don't even know the experiences of our neighbor. And we make these conclusions that no other organism has any sort of intelligence or sentience or any form of communication or reacting to its environment other than an instinctual pattern mechanism. There's no reason to believe that, right? Fungus is a billion years old. They know how to react to their environment. They know how to move in it and understand it. And they know how to communicate. And they know how to take advantage of everything. They are masters of chemistry, and they've mastered biology through this. They can fuse with other organisms through symbiosis or infest it and completely take over that organism. And they're also capable of changing the weather and harnessing different chemical and electrical properties. It's mind-blowing everything they're capable of doing. And they're capable of learning really, really fast how to do new things as they come their way. Scientists have taught oyster mushrooms how to break down plastics and old cigarettes and other toxic chemicals and waste that can't really be or disposed of normally. Yeah, give a fungus a couple generations and it will know how to break that down and convert it into an actual edible food source, which is incredible. They're also able to feed off of radiation. There's pretty much nothing they can't do if they need to do it. So they're highly advanced organisms, and they're behind most of evolution, most of biology, and a lot of the more important chemicals that the planet and we need for survival. Yet they're unrelenting decomposers. They will destroy anything in their path and continue to proliferate and spread. So there's some interesting properties of fungus we need to talk about. One of them is that they like acidity, they like, but not necessarily strong acids will still kill them, but they like more acidic environments, more lots of glucose and sugar, and they like humidity and rain, and they like darkness and electricity. Those are some of the main of the favorable conditions of a fungus. So they need darkness, and they also thrive. Most of them can thrive without oxygen. Most of them don't need oxygen, and this is partly why they were able to kind of conquer the planet or terraform the planet so long ago, is because oxygen wasn't something they needed to have in abundance in order to do what they needed to do. And even then, they helped plants with the production of oxygen by the form of algae and lichen and other mycorrhizal relationships, which is, I should explain this real quick, which is when a mycelium and a plant root symbiotically fuse, essentially, and they engage in very complicated trade between resources. And this trade can go beyond just time, and it can be like, okay, the fungus will give this tree nutrients to survive the winter if next summer the tree gives surplus back to the mushrooms. And they're able to engage in this complex communicative back and forth trade. Sometimes it's altruistic, sometimes it's very extortionary, and it's unique, and it indicates a form of knowledge and intelligence and sentience, both in plant and fungus. And there's whole networks of these, and a single fungus can connect to dozens of trees and other funguses, and the trees in that way connect with each other. Oftentimes it's called, kind of cheesy, but the wood wide web. That's kind of the known that's been given to it, and it's accurate enough in that it does. Entire forests can be connected through these mycorrhizal networks. And so the reason why I just brought that up is because it's important to know how they are able to use electric signals, and they're able to burrow into anything and then communicate with that thing. And if they want to destroy it, or if they just want to maintain that relationship. Trees are very beneficial to funguses because they don't like direct sunlight. Direct sunlight will destroy fungus in almost every scenario. Enough sunlight and the fungus will most often be destroyed. And yet there's an interesting quality of mushrooms, of the fruiting bodies of fungus, is that if you leave them out in the sun, like if you're dry baking them or something like that, if you've dried them, you can leave your mushrooms out in the sun, and they will actually convert sunlight into vitamin D, and then you can ingest that as a source of vitamin D for yourself. And I think this is just so fascinating because fungus don't grow in direct sunlight, so that's a very peculiar kind of function mushrooms are able to have. Especially since this is just the fruiting body of them. This isn't even the main organism structure. It's just the fruit of it. But we need to understand this idea that fungus are capable of these electronic impulses, and mycelium networks are kind of like brains, like disjointed brains. And these brains are also like, I don't know, like growth monsters. These like tentacle creatures. They feel and see and eat, and they do everything and communicate with these just mycelium strands, these hyphae. They're very much something out of a sci-fi book or novel. And in fact, most sci-fi stories, they feature something that resembles a fungus in its kind of unrelenting growth. It's sort of supernatural, otherworldly, destructive. It's like a corruption that just goes out, turns everyone evil, and then destroys things. And this is very deep-seated psychology, and we're going to get into this in just a minute. But I want to briefly talk about my main study of fungus and what I call mythology, which is the proposition that fungus is responsible for all of our ancient ideas of mythology, of folklore, of legends and tales and religions. And our current mythologies and religions, they're the product of this progression of abstraction. We're no longer recognizing the behavioral conscious forces of nature, and it's become so abstract that we now see this kind of other dimensional being, creator God, who's infinite and eternal and is capable of knowing all things and controls all things, or what have you. But these ancient people all across the world, they recognized that there was a force, that there was something in the world that they couldn't see, that was capable of influencing the weather. It was capable of causing sickness, of even curing sicknesses. It was capable of affecting the mind, of damaging the body, of damaging the house or the land or the crops or the cattle. It was capable of healing all of those things at the same time. It was capable of decomposing bodies, of destroying the physical body after it died. But it was also capable of the most intense spiritual experience. And the way that these got explained over time is through things like curses and healing spells and magic. Fermentation was thought to be magical because they were able to call forth the gods. The gods are yeast into this divine, to make this divine beverage. They believed that you could curse someone, and cursing expressed itself either as sort of a demonic infestation or just some ailment of some sort. And so curses were this idea that you could summon fungus to someone. You could summon this ailment to someone, and the ailment ultimately was fungus. In the same way that you could cure someone with a healing spell, you could purge all fungus from them. And then of course you have things like psychedelic mushrooms, giving these potent experiences of incomprehensible knowledge and visions and an experience only a fungus will be able to create the chemicals to induce. It's very unique and very individualized. And again, we're going to get into this in just a second. But so this study that I've been undergoing, what I call Micthology, is a way of explaining that these ancient people, they saw these forces of nature, and they correctly identified it as a force of nature. It wasn't randomness. It was very specific cause and effects, very specific intentions of something invisible. They simply didn't have the microscopes to visualize it. And by the time we got microscopes, we were way into the abstract, where we wouldn't ever consider that the idea of possession and supernatural entities, ghosts and demons and angels and spirits, were the way that ancient people expressed these fungal forces, these invisible fungal forces, and the way that they personified them, because that is most often what we fall back onto in an explanation of something we don't understand. We give it human features so that we can relate to it and understand it through that way. So that study goes into that, and I have videos talking about that, and we'll continue to make more videos on that. So, but even that kind of structure is important for the main topic of this video, and we're going to get into that right now. So the main topic is this neural hacking, this ability of fungus, of fungal organisms being able to hack into the neurons and the neurology of humans and animals and any organism. So right off the bat, we have a couple very specific types of fungus that do this, that we know do this in a very explicit way. There's the cordyceps, where they take over the minds of an ant and then control it, tell it to go up to a place high up so that it can sprout its kind of mushroom growth and then release more spores into them. It's a very dangerous pathogen, but it only affects, it's specialized to take over that ant, and pretty much no other reason. And maybe one day it will expand its host organism, maybe not. And then we see this again with different psychedelic mushrooms like psilocybin and Amanita muscaria, where this chemical gets into the brain and it causes its effects. And some people are starting to propose that this mushroom psychedelic experience, the mushroom wears the host in the same way that the cordyceps kind of takes over, but this is sort of a more mental and cognitive version of that rather than a parasitic one. And it wears the host and it causes and influences them in whatever way that it may want to. But so you have ergot and yeast and psilocybin and amanita and a host of other poisonous and hallucinatory types of fungus, and all of these are ways in which your brain is affected by chemicals that these funguses produce and create. They are products of fungus affecting the brain. And this is kind of one part of that neural hacking. I think that's been responsible for a lot of the highest spiritual, divine, mythological experiences comes from those sorts of substances. Certainly they were revered to be centers of divine experiences, everything from beer to psilocybin mushrooms to ergot and what have you. Highly regarded, so already that tells us that we're probably onto something in this study. Then we have other neural hacking that occurs on a daily basis. And this is what I call microdosing mycotoxins. Every day we're breathing in spores, millions of spores, and they will get into all sorts of parts of your body. Now, one of the main things that the human body has done was develop a way to kill any pathogen immediately. And warm-blooded animals were able to be very successful because the temperatures of our bodies destroys most fungal pathogens as soon as it gets into us. Now, obviously there's some exceptions because we have many types of funguses inoculated in us, and for the most part these actually help us and we need them to survive. But in terms of pathogenic fungus, warm-blooded animals destroy most of them simply by being warm-blooded. And what reptiles had to do, being cold-blooded, was shed their skin and completely purge their bodies every so often, or they'll get sick and die, and many of them will anyways. Of course, many warm-blooded animals, especially humans, get sick and die. And a lot of this is through the failure to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis exists to keep our body at the ideal point and place in which to destroy any pathogens. In ways in which your body may lose its defenses, its immune system is reduced and diminished, is through being over acidic, having a very acidic diet, having a very sugary diet. These things will promote fungal growth in us because we're making the environment easier for them and more perfect for their conditions of growth. And also being exposed to the cold, being in the dark all the time, being in the rain all the time, and being cold all the time. Even places in the tropic where it's humid a lot of the time, you're going to have the likelihood of you having a lot of problems is increased. A lot of fungal pathogens will be able to get into the body. But this is exactly why there's things like seasonal mood disorder, or there's things where if you're depressed, maybe you haven't been going outside enough. And the way it's been explained is that, and this is partly true, is that it helps with serotonin production, which is a very important hormone for keeping you happy and your mood levels and stuff like that. But the reason why it affects your happiness is because it helps keep your brain and body clean. Since fungus, for the most part, are able to exist in sunlight, getting that direct sunlight, those direct UV rays, can really help heal your body. What goes on with depression and mental disorders in general is fungal neural hacking going on in the brain, what's called mycotoxins. And as we've established, fungus is very capable of entering and communicating with nerves. We saw this with lichen. We saw this with mycorrhizal relationships. We saw this with psychedelic substances and cordyceps, and they've done experiments testing and looking at the way in which different funguses are able to maneuver their environment and be able to understand electromagnetism and electrical circuits and things of that nature. And we could continue to do studies on that, and I have some ideas about that, but we're not going to get into that right now. So these mood disorders and these mental diseases and dementia and Alzheimer's and all of these things that are affecting the brain, even just low energy levels and fatigue and fogginess in the head, all these ways in which the brain and the mental department of your body is lowered in function is a result of fungal mycotoxins. And they're able to get into the brain, and they're able to control parts of it, often just briefly, but if you don't ever get better, they keep coming back and they keep growing and proliferating and damaging the brain till you eventually either die or you get sick enough from other reasons. So let's take a look at that. We'll start with sugar. So in our stomachs is a kind of yeast, a kind of candida fungus, and they love sugar, they love meat and acidic foods and all the things that feel good to eat when you eat them. The foods that are highly enjoyable. And the reason why they're enjoyable is because the yeast in your stomach, in your digestive system, they're hacking into the nerves that you have there. The gut is often called the second brain because of how many nerves it has. And the fungus is able to take advantage of those nerves and tell your body that it needs sugar. It needs these cravings. It has these cravings. And one way you can tell that you have a lot of these yeasts affecting you in that way is, let's say you eat a normal meal and the meal leaves your stomach feeling empty. Even if you ate large portions, you just feel empty inside and you feel like you didn't eat at all. And yet you have some chocolate or candy or ice cream or something shortly after, and suddenly you feel satisfied. Oftentimes we don't feel satisfied until we've had dessert, and that's because the fungus is telling you that. It's because it wants that sugar. And if you don't give it sugar, if you don't feed it the food that you're craving for, it's going to punish you. It's going to give you stomach pains. It's going to make you feel weak. It's going to make you feel like there's nothing in the world that can make you feel better except for sugar. And in this case, and in those cases, you can recognize that you have a large growth of fungus in your digestive system that you'll ultimately want to purge out by, eating more alkaline foods that will reduce that fungus in you, keeping your body alkaline and staying away from sugar and meats and other acidic and fatty foods. It doesn't mean you can never have those again. It's just that when you do, they're going to proliferate. So that's one common way of neural hacking that goes on pretty much on a day-to-day basis. And more, they're linking pretty much all mental diseases. It's slowly trending towards this way to dietary functions. I mean, obviously, if your body doesn't have the right nutrients, it starts to break down at different levels. But the reason why it breaks down when you don't have nutrients is because you don't have the defenses to stop fungus from attacking different parts of your body. Those are what those nutrients are for. They're to keep your skin from bruising, from letting fungus in. They're to keep you from being able to target any pathogen and destroy them. So when you have a lack of nutrients, you get more fungus. And when they start to hack into the brain, that's when you get different mental disorders. And these mental disorders, it's very hard to pinpoint right what they are. Psychology and that whole industry of mental disorders is completely, I don't know, it's at a very weird place. It just got finished with electroshock therapy and lobotomies, and is currently on like a lithium and other really toxic metals, and trying these things out to cure mental diseases. And the whole industry is just messed up, but so is pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. But there's just that lack of understanding of how this stuff works. So mycotoxins get into the brain and they hack into your nervous system. Let's say you have this moment of severe depression, and then in a day it goes away and you feel fine. And what's happening is that nerves and neurons, they're extremely durable. As long as they're not destroyed completely, they'll bounce back, and there'll be almost no sign that there was damage at all. And fungus, especially spores, they're microscopic, they'll be destroyed, and there'll be no trace of them. So as you're microdosing these mycotoxins on a regular basis, your body's just going through that normal cycle that it's been for millions of years of your brain just rebounding from different pathogenic attacks, and these attacks just disappearing like they never happened. And it's partly why the fossil record for fungus is so minute, and that only recently we found something that changed what we thought of evolution, because we thought fungus was a more recent development. But it's just because they're so hard to preserve. As soon as they die, they're going to get destroyed, evaporated. There'll be no trace of them. So finding fossils is extremely rare, but they found a few, and that rewrote the timeline of when fungus evolved and what derived from fungus, which is ultimately plants and animals, through this complexity and the arms race that fungus and bacteria are kind of undergoing all the time. But let's take a look at more examples of these neural hackings that go on. So you have moments of intense itching, or even these moments, especially at night. It's going to happen almost only at night, and this is why we have a supernatural kind of fear of the night. We're often randomly afraid. We're often get into a moment of panic or something, and especially as a kid, you run to your bed, or you you have to hide under the covers. You just don't feel safe anywhere alone in the dark when it's cold at night, because these are perfect fungal conditions. Some of that is that superstitious conditioning, and others is you breathe in these mycotoxins that are now coming out because it's dark and cold, and they're briefly making you trip. They're neurohacking, you're microdosing these mycotoxins. And so there's all these random anecdotal accounts that pretty much every human could give of briefly hallucinating, of thinking you're hearing something, or you think you saw something moving in the shadows of your room. And so all of that is that neural hacking. Or you might feel intense desire to itch a spot, and you might even do it to the point where you break the skin. And this is the goal of these fungus, is that they're attacking your skin, or they're attacking your brain, and they're basically getting you to feel like you need to itch until you break skin. And once your skin's broken, fungus is able to bore inside. It's all kind of that hacking process, and that's why it seems so painful to not itch, yet completely pleasurable when you do, even if you're destroying your own body in the process. There's that cognitive dissonance caused by the kind of pleasure control that funguses are often able to control us on. And even I think yawning is a neural hacking. And yawning's been debated for a long time as to what it is, why it exists, what's the function or purpose of it. It's kind of like the opposite of sneezing, right? Sneezing, you have this impulsive expelling muscle reaction, and yawning is kind of this impulsive inhaling reaction. And they've been able to kind of pinpoint it down to something neurological and something very ancient, something from like the brainstem of your neurology. And we've, from yawning, developed social, based on our communal living, and empathetic social ability to yawn when we see someone else yawning. But the fact that it comes from like boredom and tiredness and fatigue, and that empathy, as well as it's been noticed in very sick people, or if you're about to be really sick, and even if you're close to death, you're going to be yawning a lot. And this has been observed and for thousands of years, and so there's a lot of superstitions around yawning. Frequently could indicate something bad is going to happen to you. But even just yawning a couple times can just be you're fatigued, you're tired. And all these theories about it helps wake you up, helps refresh you. It's a way to activate your mind or shut it down when you're about to sleep or wake up. All these different theories. But what I think it is this neural hacking again, where the fungus is messing with your brain to trigger a forced inhalation. Now, whether this is just a product of you reacting, of your body basically forcing you into this reaction because of neural hacking, or it's a way for the fungus to force you to inhale because maybe there's other spores around it and it needs you to draw that in. And we've just developed that social empathy without our bodies understanding that it's actually forcing that inhalation to get us to breathe in more fungal spores. What's interesting is that yawning, one of the few actual causes of yawning, things that we know cause yawning, we still don't know like why or necessarily how, but certain kinds of drugs can induce yawning into you. It could be spurts of yawning or just a couple, and these are often psilocybin mushrooms, and even opium can cause you to yawn. And what we see is that these chemicals that affect the brain are causing you to yawn. And I think we can draw some conclusions that obviously need to be tested, that it's an outside influence that is causing yawning, other than the social kind of empathy one that we've developed. And even that's psychology, so maybe you can say that, but that's not the point. The yawning is a result of some outside influence exerting its control into you. It's not always a bad thing, but it's usually these microdosed mycotoxins. And if you ever wonder why, like, you have a grandparent or something and you go into their house and there's kind of this distinct smell to it, and maybe they're older and their mind is not what it used to be, and you feel like it's haunted, and you tend to think older things as being haunted when there's history to them. There's haunting involved in that. That haunting is just there's more fungal mycotoxins in there, and it's causing that person to slowly lose their mind. And often these people have turned their diet into one purely of sugar, and their house is kind of cold, and the fungus is slowly taking over to create this perfect environment for them to take over this host organism. And they're going to hack the brain for a long period of time and keep that body alive for as long as it can. Even just because it's fed on sugar doesn't mean you're necessarily going to die sooner, because the fungus can keep that body alive with sugar for a very, very long time. And so that's one of the ways that neural hacking occurs, is through these diseases we call dementia and Alzheimer's, and just these powerful disintegrating diseases that they're slowly destroying the mind. But that's why old houses, we feel like it's haunted. That haunted feeling is associated with fungus. And it's always been this way with the idea of evil spirits coming into the home, and that ancient people used garlic or wind chimes, something that is antifungal, and that's how you kept these evil spirits out. These evil spirits are funguses. And so this neural hacking goes on, and we have this development of superstitious fear that it gets personified into, demons with pitchforks and horns, or jinns or fairies, and evil spirits and poltergeists, and all this collection of supernatural and superstitious entities across culture, all coming from fungus, and oftentimes this neural hacking of this feeling of being possessed and haunted and blacking out, and moments of cognitive phenomena and anomalies. And it comes and goes so fast that it will be very hard for scientists to kind of pinpoint that if they're not looking for it directly. And that's kind of where we're at, where no one is really examining this at this level. But hopefully this video gives you some ideas about kind of what goes on in the world, what's actually happening in these biological processes and these anomalies, how we've trended from that understanding of this invisible force and personifying that into these extremely abstract ideas of God and devils and angels and spirits and curses and magic and stuff, when in fact all of these just come from fungus. And they are the main dominators of the planet, and they have extreme intelligence. They have the ability to use electricity. Thunder and lightning will cause, or mushrooms will grow more than ever around thunder and lightning. That's why we have pain in the rain, why our joints, we wake up in pain at night, or we get sicker at night or in the rain. That's where all these ideas come from of, hey, don't play in the rain, you're going to get sick. The water, unless it's acid water, which we are having a lot of because of our pollution, but if it's just normal rain, that's not going to affect us. What's affecting us is the spores. And even those spores may have actually caused it to rain because of the way they can hold on to accumulation or condensation and help it accumulate it into clouds. And so that's one way in which fungus control the weather. They've basically hacked nature, and they can hack our brains. And they're highly intelligent, highly specialized, highly conscious in ways we probably won't understand, or we aren't ready to understand. They're certainly kind of the overlords of our planet, if you will. We think of them as gods. We think of them as demons, as angels. basically everything good or bad that we associate in our lives, mentally, physically, spiritually, and superstitiously, is the result of fungus, or has to do with fungus in some way. And it's hard, I think, for people to wrap their heads around this because of how invisible and how undiscerning they seem. And even you think of like those shows of hoarders where these people are living in all of this filth, and oftentimes it is very filthy, on top of, you know, their piles of junk, and they're stuck in this mindset where they don't want to clean, they don't want to do anything. And in these instances, it's this fungus neural hacking mycotoxins, and they are basically telling the person, feeding that person, that you need this stuff and you can't get rid of it because this stuff has fungus on it and all around it, and it makes you complacent. It makes you think that you're okay and that there's nothing wrong. And we need to understand that we aren't ourselves. We are a colony of many organisms, and we are very much subject to these mycotoxins that will affect our mood and behavior, both in small scale, just instantaneous, random points, and also in larger, lifelong moments of cutting yourself, scratching yourself till you bleed, or not wanting to get rid of things. And certainly if you've ever had open your fridge and there's just a piece of food in there that's been completely covered in fungus, you get this kind of cold feeling, and you just feel almost gross and sick and disgusted, but also kind of this like incomprehensible fear, and you want to throw it away and be done with it and not think about it as much as possible. And all these kind of feelings you have around a fungus growth, and it just feels very surreal. They're the same feelings people describe when they think they're being possessed by demons, or they think that there's a demonic force somewhere in the room with them. Keep in mind too that they are intelligent, and when you have a haunted, like asylum especially, where it's just generations of torture and just terrible things happening to people, the fungus there is going to be extremely aggressive, extremely scary and corrupted kind of. And when you go there, you're going to be breathing in these spores whether you like it or not. They're going to be making you see things, and it's going to be essentially a bad trip, and you won't even know you're tripping, of course, because again, it's this microdosing. And one of the first things that they do, these mycotoxins, is that they convince you that there's nothing wrong, that there's nothing going on. Kind of like how they do with sugar as well. They don't make sugar unappealing, they make it seem like it's the best thing for you and it will make you feel better. And the same thing with these asylums just these super haunted locations. What you're feeling in these senses are very much real in that they're mycotoxins, but also very much these kind of hallucinations that they can cause you, or that they can induce in you and put you under. And I think a lot of people have heard of that rice experiment, where you have 3 jars of rice, one with a good label, one with a negative label, and one that's neutral. And the idea behind this experiment was that they were proving water consciousness by pouring water into the jars of rice and then sealing those jars and giving it a few weeks to see what grows. And they say that the good jar will have good mold, kind of green, more aromatic, more structured, kind of just cleaner looking. And then the negative one will have really destructive looking, corrupted, very foul smelling and unappealing mold. And the neutral one will kind of have a little bit of both, kind of be in between. Depending on where it was positioned, it may have influences from the sides and stuff. Now, I'm not saying that water isn't consciousness, but that experiment proves, or suggests, that what's happening is a fungal intelligence reacting to these negative and positive forces, that they're highly aware, and what you're saying Maybe it's something to do with the electromagnetism or the energy or, what have you. They're able to understand positive and negative reinforcements and stuff like that. They're highly conscious. And I think that experiment only proves fungal intelligence and nothing else. It's suggestive of fungal intelligence and nothing else. But then you kind of apply that to everything. That's why unhappy places feel like they're haunted. You feel more scared in them. There's a reason to, because of the kind of fungus that is being grown there. It's being affected and influenced by everything that's going on. Like I said, probably some fungus thing. Really try to pay attention. Nighttime is the realm of the fungus, right? It's the growth period of fungus. Pay attention to how you feel during the night, what makes you feel scared and why you may feel scared, or you've unsettled, maybe is a better word, why you have these superstitious ideas. Think the next time you find mold on your food, think about how it makes you feel and think about how that relates to other superstitious feelings that you previously always thought of as kind of ghosts or haunted or demonic things or whatever your beliefs are. They all ultimately derive from fungus. So I think just keep that in mind, and understanding the neural hacking that goes on, I think, is very important, and your diet is important, and knowing that fungus is its first goal is obviously to get you to not know it's there. That one quote from what's it called? The Usual Suspects. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was proving to the world that he doesn't exist. It's kind of like that, but the devil in this case is fungus, and it convinces you that everything's okay that's going on in your life, or that you need this or you need that. It makes you very compulsive, makes you very impulsive, can make you do things that you shouldn't in the right state of mind. And I don't mean to say that everything you do, like when you're just shopping and you buy a bunch of stuff, that any sort of impulse or compulsion is fungal. I'm not suggesting that. It's just that there's these certain serious mental illnesses, or even just background things that you do, like itch yourself until you break skin, that may be more indicative of fungal neural hacking. And again, you'll never know it's happening because your neurons recover and the fungus completely dies or goes away. I guess the last thing I want to talk about is ways in which you can help clean your house up. If you feel haunted in it, or if you don't know if it's clean from funguses and stuff like that, is you need to clean your air filters and air conditionings. You need to make sure you're not breathing in molds. You need to find locations of foul odors. Usually means that there's a possibility that fungus is going to start growing if you're not directly smelling fungus. So water damage is where fungus will grow. Make sure you get a good amount of sunlight to just clean your body from different fungal infestations. Ancient people hung garlic up. Garlic is a strong antifungus. There's different incenses that may be antifungal. Wind chimes is superstitiously believed to stop dark forces, and this is likely true because high frequencies can destroy the actual fungal cells. It can make them basically explode. It destroys their cell wall, and they kind of evaporate after that. So sunlight, making sure your ducts are clean, your vents, changing your air filters, maybe even having a number of plants in your house. And if these plants die really fast, even though you're doing everything you're supposed to with those plants, water and sunlight and stuff, you should be able to see if they're dying because of fungus. If they start to get spotty and have lots of different discoloration or holes and stuff, that may be a good way to tell if there's a lot of fungal spores in your house, if they're just eating through any plants that you have. But also the quality of oxygen may help. Checking your water, making sure you have a good kind of water, and just not leaving food out for too long, and understanding that fungus is going to grow in your fridge. because it doesn't need oxygen really, and many of them can survive in pretty cold conditions. Generally not freezer conditions, but there's fungus that can do it as well. So that's why freezers usually keep food longer than refrigerators, and food will keep even longer the less times you open it. If you have 2 loaves of bread, you open one and take some bread out, there's a higher chance that it's going to develop mold before your other bread that you haven't opened up. It's just because what gets in there, it takes time for it to grow. The conditions need to be right. Now, obviously, leaving things in the sun can destroy a lot of stuff as well, like especially medicines and food and stuff will get destroyed in the sun as well, just because a lot of those chemicals are also get broken down by sunlight. So you can't just like store things in sunlight. And yet you can put mushrooms out that you want to eat, and they'll get vitamin D from it. And also, mushrooms are some of the healthiest antifungal foods out there, which is interesting. Again, there's fungus that are both really good for us and really bad for us. It's not really about us, it's what they do to protect themselves. And many raw vegetables, some of their best minerals and vitamins and antifungal properties are on kind of the surface of the vegetable. And the reason that is because they need to stop fungus from eating the rest of getting into the core and burrowing through the skin and stuff. So many of the most beneficial chemicals are on the surface because of that. So when we cook and blend a lot of these foods, it can destroy the benefits that you want to eat those foods for anyways. Like garlic, a lot of its antifungal properties are destroyed when it's heated. But there's all these different chemicals and stuff, and there's a lot going on. Just do the best you can with that. If you think there's a serious infestation, you may have to check your vents, or just look for different spots in your house that may be having really bad water damage or something, and just making sure there's no. I think there was something else I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember. I'm pretty sure they know when you're trying to like figure them out, and they like dial up what they do to you. So keep in mind, if you're studying funguses, that you're probably going to experience them a lot more. They're highly intelligent. They're obviously very protective of themselves, but I think they react to kindness, and you can really engage with them. Especially like people who use mushrooms as teachers, and the ancients used to try to summon fungus or try to get fungus to collect in the rain. Obviously they called these spirits and gods and stuff like that, but it's all interrelated, it's all connected, even if we understand it in the more scientific mycological way, or in the ancient mycological way, which is called mythology. But yeah, I'm sure I'll be making more of these videos, so whatever I forgot, I'll talk about again. But thanks for watching. Peace out.